Good afternoon. Welcome to the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame, whether you are here at the Hesburgh Auditorium in person or via cyberspace, welcome. I am Atalia Omer. I am an assistant professor of religion, conflict, and peacebuilding here at the Kroc Institute and the Department of Sociology. We are gathered here today with our esteemed panel of our in-house expert in order to engage in a conversation concerning the rise of civil resistance in the Middle East. In mid-December, a young street vendor by the name of Muhammad Bouazizi set himself alight in an act of public protest. Bouazizi was a university graduate whose failed attempt to seek employment led him to sell fruits on the streets of Sidi Bouzid, not very far from the capital, Tunis. In response to the government's confiscation of his unauthorized stand, he burned himself. This act of self-immolation of the 26-year-old street vendor became the catalyst for a wave of protest and massive street demonstrations that ended the presidency of Ben Ali in Tunisia. The outpouring of people to the streets of Tunis was reportedly spearheaded by the labor movements, internet activists, and by rural workers. Shortly after the ousting of Ben Ali, what has been termed the democratic outburst spread to other locations across the Arab world, including Lebanon, Morocco, Yemen, Sudan, among other locations. Most dramatically, in the forefront of the news are the events unfolding in Egypt. Today is day 16th of the pro-democracy uprising in Egypt. Egypt's pro-democracy revolution is now reportedly seizing a new momentum, one day after hundreds of thousands turned out for one of the largest protests in Cairo's main Liberation Square. A gathering of protesters led to the evacuation of the Egyptian cabinet building, and tent camps are also being set up outside the Egyptian parliament, rendering it, in effect, closed for business. Furthermore, in a new twist of events, Egypt's labor movement has launched new strikes across the country with an estimated 10,000 workers taking part. The events that have captivated the world's attention generated an avalanche of opinions and analysis. There are those who ask whether we are now witnessing a pan-Arab narrative of reform and self-empowerment after decades of colonialism and post-colonial authoritarianism. Is this movement going to last? How should the rest of us react? What should be the role of the international community, and especially the United States? In contrast to those who may be intoxicated by the narrative of freedom and liberation, counter-dominant voices communicate primarily through the corporate media, fears a possible takeover of the revolution by radical Islamists, a fear that, in the words of political theorist Elizabeth Shackman-Hurd, rhetorically, quote, closes down all kinds of political spaces and possibilities. Because if secular politics has been taken to mean good politics, limited democratization, stability, and support for the peace treaty with Israel, Islamic politics is being translated as bad politics, end of quote. The question is whether it is possible to move beyond this dichotomy and beyond the presuppositions that inform it and other grand narratives deployed in order to explain recent events. We gathered here today to have a conversation informed in part by those broader framing questions. So our first speaker is Emad Shahin, who is the Henry Luce Associate Professor of Religion, Conflict, and Peacebuilding at the Kroc Institute and the Department of Government here at Notre Dame. Professor Shahin is a comparativist who examines the foundation for democracy and political reform within Islamic law, philosophy, and political practices. Shahin has published extensively in these subjects. His recent work includes a book titled Political Ascent: Contemporary Islamic Movements in North Africa, a very relevant work indeed. Professor Shahin is also the editor-in-chief of the Oxford Encyclopedia of Islam and Politics, forthcoming in 2011, and is a co-editor with John Esposito of Georgetown University of the Oxford Handbook of Islam and Politics. Professor Shahin will speak for 20 minutes, focusing primarily on the events in Tunisia and Egypt. Next, we will hear from Asher Kaufman, who is an associate professor of history and peace studies here. Kaufman is the author of Reviving Phoenicia, The Search for Identity in Lebanon, a book that looks at the history of modern Lebanese national identity. Professor Kaufman has also written extensively on topics such as the evolution of Hezbollah in Lebanon, Israeli policy in the Middle East, and boundary disputes in the region. He is finishing now a book looking specifically at border dynamics in the tri-border region of Syria, Lebanon, and Israel. Professor Kaufman will speak for about 10 minutes, focusing his remarks on the case of Lebanon vis-à-vis recent events. Our third speaker is David Cortright. Cortright is the Director of Policy Studies at the Kroc Institute and Chair of the Board of the Fourth Freedom Forum. Cortright has taught nonviolent social change and peace studies at Notre Dame since 1989. He is the author or editor of 17 books, including Peace, A History of Movements and Ideas, and Gandhi and Beyond, Nonviolence for an Age of Terrorism. Cortright will reflect on the events in the Middle East deploying the lens of nonviolent resistance. We'll begin with our panelists, and we'll give them an opportunity to react to one another before opening the discussion to the audience. Professor Shahin.
Good afternoon, and thank you for coming and showing interest in these momentous events that are taking place in a number of Arab countries in the Middle East: Egypt, Tunisia, Algeria, Yemen, Lebanon, and others to come soon. What I will try to do is, I would like just, to put the names on the faces and share with you some of the images that came out of the demonstrations and the pro-democracy protests in both Tunisia and Egypt. I will show some slides and make some brief comments on them. And my objective, of course, is to show the grassroots nature of these movements, and also the ultimate goal that they are trying to achieve. These are, in essence, many of course have portrayed them as economic, socio-economic demands and so on, but they also have broadened their agenda and have included a clear platform or demands for a political reform, a complete overhauling of the political systems in their respective countries. I will also, after the slideshow, just raise a number of questions and then try to address them. This is how it all started. As Atalia mentioned, it started with gentleman to the left, Mohammed Bouazizi. This is Mohammed Bouazizi, and the gent in Tunisia, the street vendor, as Atalia mentioned, and gave you his account. And the gentleman to the right is Khalid Said. Just to give a little bit of a narrative about his background, Khalid Said, young Egyptian businessman, 28 years old. He was dragged out of an internet club or cafe in Alexandria, taken to a lobby of a building in Egypt, and then brutalized by the secret police, and he died under their hands as a result of their torture and so on. I didn't want to show you, of course, the graphic picture of his after the torture. This is something that's really intolerable. But these people, look at them, or you could look at them as the spark that ignited the whole thing. But of course, these were facing, or were being faced now with really grassroots revolutions. And revolutions, they don't build overnight. They were if you wish, the spark, and at the same, I would call it actually the light that showed the people the way to dignity and also to freedoms. Of course, this is again how things started to unfold. As a result of the death of Bouazizi, who set himself ablaze, and Khalid, immediately friends on Facebook, social media, started to use all the means available to them in order to mobilize the population to rise up and call for freedom. I will explain, of course, all this in detail, but as you can see, Egypt written by Internet Explorer, Google, Yahoo, Twitter, and of course Facebook and so on. And of course, the attempt, of course, to curtail this and shut all the social media and the Facebook down and so on. So you have this young lady asking Mubarak to let her call her mommy and use the email because he shut that down. You can see also the similarity, even in terms of language. Tunisia is a Francophone, of course. The second language is French. Egypt is Anglophone. The second language is English. But the Francophone word, the French word for leave, depart, dégage, has been used simultaneously. Actually, Egypt took place a month later. But you see the inspiration from and the similarities, the analogy and similarities between the two revolutions. Of course, the calls through the Facebook, Twitter, clips, videos, contacts, massive contacts, started to spread and managed actually to mobilize thousands, hundreds actually of thousands of protesters and pro-democracy demonstrators in Tunisia, upper left, and in Egypt, down. This is, of course, in both countries, an unprecedented show of public protest. Of course, I said grassroots movements because they were not about Islam, they were not about Israel, they were not about the United States. Actually, they were mainly about freedoms, dignity, bread, and democracy, of course. Many social segments in society played a major role. Women, of course, from different backgrounds. You see them veiled, unveiled in Tunisia, unveiled in Egypt, and of course, braving the soldiers, the arrests, and everything, and of course, making this statement, carrying the Egyptian flag and showing deep sentiments, nationalist sentiments. People even started to consider the as they started, just to keep going for days and so on. So they considered this as festive activities in which their kids started to take part. They take their kids, raise slogans and so on. Even kids who are getting tired are taking place, infants, babies, toddlers, and so on. She's yawning. She wants to go home. She wants to sleep. And everything actually, that's what we mean by nonviolent. Everything with nonviolent. Both demonstrations in Tunisia and Egypt actually raised the slogan, peaceful, peaceful. Most of you, of course, know the word silm, salam. So the word they raised was silmiya, silmiya, peaceful, peaceful. Even after they were hit hard by the thugs of Mubarak and the thugs of Ben Ali and so on, they still kept saying, and you will see it, peaceful, peaceful. This is part of the festivities, and then the momentum that was gathered. You see slogans in English, slogans in Arabic, songs, even bands. It started even to collect or to attract different segments, people from Al-Azhar. Let's start with Tunisia, lawyers, teachers, state unions, labor unions, and so on. In Egypt, the same thing. Some of the movie stars and actors, also journalists, lawyers, and so on. And it was spreading throughout the country. Even people, as they started to get long and long, they couldn't postpone their weddings for long, so they started to have their weddings in front of the tanks. These are all actual photos, of course. I mean, you see the tanks and the weddings. These are just two. There were so many taking place. Also, the demonstrations and pro-democracy, and this is really a remarkable photo. These are some of my best shots. It shows you a number of things. You can see in the one on the upper left side, the Quran and the crucifix together. And underneath, of course, the same thing. The one to the right, actually, these are Coptic Christians, Egyptian Copts, protecting Muslims on last Friday while they were doing their Friday sermon. On Sunday, the same thing took place, but on the reverse. Muslims were protecting the Copts while they were doing their sermons in the square, in Tahrir Square. Of course, things started to turn ugly in both countries. The one to the left, I call him the Lion of Egypt. You see how he's braving the soldiers and so on. Again, they were very peaceful. This is the response they got. Just move this. And of course, they were faced or met with tear gas canisters, Look at this one. It has been played, of course, on CNN several times. Made in the US, and it's very recent, August 2010. Again, just to show you a remarkable persistence and insistence on the peaceful nature. Of course, there was throwing of rocks and acts of self-defense and so on. But this shows you, of course, the weapons that were used. Look at the gentleman to the left. I called it the bread gun. He was using bread, a baguette, French baguette, in order to shoot at the demonstration, at the police and so on. And again, this is another innovative use of bread because of the stones and stone throwing. So he was using the bread to protect as buffers and so on, to protect his head. This guy used bottles. So most of these demonstrations were, of course, were not, and they kept raising the non-violent, or insisting on the non-violent nature, stop violence, and trying, of course, to extend hand of peace to the military, throwing flowers and putting flowers on tanks. And finally, of course, and this is the latest scenes, they even sleeping in the tracks of the tanks in order to prevent the military or the Republican guards from encroaching and dispersing them or attacking them. These are the final shots. And look at the similarity. And look at the inspiration. Tunisia, they raised game over. The young, it's like a Nintendo game and so on. The game is over. Game is over for Ben Ali, and game over for Mubarak. I leave it here, but of course the game will be over soon. I will raise a number of questions. One is, where did all this come from? Where all these people came from? The second one is, why is Mubarak still sticking around? He's the sticking point now. And why has his regime managed to survive or sustain until now? And then a third question is, will this, what we have seen now, spread to other parts of the Arab world, of the Middle East or not? And a fourth question, should we be surprised that this has taken place? All this kind of act of innocence, that we were shocked really that, this happened and so on, and finally the Arab exceptionalism and Muslim exceptionalism and so on was wrong and stuff like that. Could that act as really a good excuse for this state of surprise and shock and out of touch and so on, of the Europeans, of course, and the US as well? And then finally, of course, the big question, will that affect Israel and the peace treaty and the United States and its strategic interests in the area or not? This is what I will try very quickly, and please, Atalia, control the time and let me, ask me to stop whenever you want. Now, what I will do, excellent. What I will do, I'll just, of course, I cannot cover everything. These are revolutions. They might be aborted. I mean, nothing might happen tomorrow. We don't know how they are going to unfold, but these are really historical. We're seeing before our eyes history in the making. This is unprecedented in Egypt since 1919 in different aspects. I mean, I can speak about so many dimensions about this revolution. The national unity that this showed, the strong social fabrics between Muslims and Copts in Egypt. And I'm not going to go into conspiracy and what they are doing now, but just as a footnote, it's alleged, it's reported throughout the Arab media that the former interior minister of Mubarak is now being interrogated because of his alleged role in the bombing of the church, yes, in January 1st. All right? We as Egyptians know what the state does and so on, but anyway, I will address very selectively certain aspects. Economics, because many people don't talk about the economics behind this. I will talk about a very weird concept, but that's how I love to teach politics. It's values. So I will talk about the issue of humiliation, and then I will talk about the social media and other questions as causes behind this revolt. Economics. As you know, both countries, surprisingly, for the past at least 7 or 8 years, have been showcases, good exemplar of the World Bank and the IMF. These are the babies of the World Bank and the IMF in terms of their ability to implement the structural adjustment program, achieve steady, sustainable economic growth, and so on. And they were, of course, always flagged as the good cases of structural adjustment and so on. What was behind the scene, it was really a deep alliance between a a state bureaucracy and business cronies that created massive corruption in both countries. Now, some figures. Despite the fact that they, just for their credit, they achieved steady economic growth annually and so on and so forth, not based on productive elements or factors, but actually on natural gas and tourism and other things, on rentierism, more than anything else. But the whole thing really produced a lot of losers and very few winners. And the winners, of course, were what I used to call the 40 thieves, Alibaba and the 40 thieves, Mubarak al-Bari and his 40 thieves. So, yes, that's how I used to teach this. Now, in terms of Egypt, 200 individuals, not families, 200 individuals controlled 90% of the national wealth. These are not propaganda figures. These are figures that are now being investigated by the national audit and so on. Egypt's debt, just as an information, is $37 billion to 40 billion, 37 billion. Mubarak's wealth has been estimated, as you have all read, from 40 to 70 billion dollars. Now, last year, the 40 thieves have managed to secure $40 billion in bad loans and uncovered loan. Mubarak issued directive to the central bank to back these loans, bad loans. Now, if you move to Tunisia, as you know, Tunisia, Ben Ali's family controlled 90%, 50% of the economy, and Ben Ali's wealth is estimated at 5 billion. So this is part of the picture. I'm not going to go into corruption and so on because that will take us forever to talk about. The second element is the element of humiliation. I know that this doesn't ring, strong bells here and so on, but humiliation in the sense that this is exactly what incited people like Bouazizi and others in Egypt, in Algeria, and Tunisia to set themselves ablaze. It was a statement of a deep feeling of humiliation that every Tunisian and every Egyptian has felt for a number of years, and here are the evidence. If you look at the Egyptian army in terms of size is 465,000 strong. If you look at the state security, the secret service is 1.7 million. These are all official figures. 1.7 million secret service in Egypt, as opposed, it's like, maybe double, 3 times the size of the military. And these were unleashed against Egyptians, and similar, as you all know, Ben Ali is a former security service general. He's not an army general. He's a secret service general. And both of them really built a huge police state. The indication, very simple, was that usually under dictatorships and so on, dictatorships will target their opponents, their opposition, the source of dissent, activists and so on. Egyptian police and Tunisian police, excellent, thank you. For the 5 years or 6 years, no, 5 minutes, for 7 or 8 years have been torturing, targeting civilians, dealing with the civilians the same way they have been dealing with political dissents and dissidents, which was again unprecedented. A very clear example, just to put you in the picture, even if they have a suspect in mind and so on, they storm his house, it happens several times, just they throw him out of the balcony. 3rd floor, 5th floor, and these are not rumors, these are facts. And we all Egyptians knew these facts. Okay, that's exactly as Atalia said, the guy, his what do you call it, the vending, it's a cart, was confiscated, and then he was slapped by a policewoman on his face, like adding insult to injury. He set himself ablaze. That's exactly the public humiliation that many has suffered. The social media, of course, as the third. So we have the economic, we have the humiliation, and we have the social media. Of course, just to add to the humiliation, the idea of like succession, hereditary republics, and so on, and the fact that Mubarak wanted and insisted on bequeathing power to his son, that was like really kind of unacceptable to most Egyptians. But they needed the spark to ignite all this. Now, the social media, of course, played a major and huge role in this, in terms, of course, of this generation of youth. All what you see now is the work, as everybody says, It's not the Muslim Brotherhood. It's not in Egypt or the Nahda in Tunisia. It is the work of youth who most of them did not even know each other. They only got together through Facebook and the social media and so on. All of them. An example, Khalid Said, when he was beaten to death in Egypt, the Google geek, all what he did was the following day, he created a web page, we are all Khalid Said, and he started to mobilize for the past year. He has been working on this for the past year, until they got him, of course, recently. Why is Mubarak holding on? Good question. Tunisia is different from Mubarak. Ben Ali did a fatal mistake by asking his chief of staff to fire at the demonstrators. The man, the general, because the Tunisian army is different from the Egyptian army. It's much smaller, and also has been always depoliticized and headed by a civilian and so on. It's really a depoliticized army and so on. The chief of staff refused. Ben Ali put him under house arrest. The man, of course, broke out of the house arrest and asked the president to leave. He regrouped his men and asked Ben Ali to leave. So the military turned against Ben Ali. In Egypt, the situation is totally different. The military has always had, since the demonstrations, its role, despite all what you hear in the news, because they just, they quote from each other. It's highly respected military and so on. The role of the Egyptian military has been very ambiguous in this. It's still siding with Mubarak and is still backing the regime. And that's why things did not tip to the side or to the balance of the protesters and the pro-democracy demonstrators and so on. It's key in this equation. I will have to move fast. Will it spread? There are common elements between Egypt, Algeria, Tunisia, Yemen, most of the Arab countries. An inflated youth population. It is estimated that the Arab population under 30 constitutes 60% of these respective countries and so on. A state of unemployment, a state of corruption, high inflation, and as I said, a huge army of losers because of all this kind of economic reforms and structural adjustment program and so on, rampant corruption and so on. These are all common. However, each country is different in terms of its social and political fabric and its response, and of course, I'll be happy to speak about each one individually if you wish in the question answer. Now, should we be surprised? Of course, the US administration showed some kind of initial surprise. They were shocked in the beginning. If you remember, during the State of the Union address, President Obama actually declared that he would support the human rights and universal rights of Tunisians and of the pro-democracy people throughout the region. The following day, Hillary Clinton came out and said Mubarak's regime is stable and they are looking into all these problems. There was clear contradiction, confusion, until they managed to get their act together until last week, and then they got into the confusion again. They like, the general. They can't, give up this idea. They like Omar Suleiman's and their like, and the Musharrafs and so on. They can't give up this idea. But it's not working, of course. So that's the situation and where it stands in terms of the surprise. I'll conclude. What will it mean to the Israeli, the peace treaty between Egypt and Israel and the United States and so on? I think, and this is my own assessment, the peace treaty is safe and it will be intact for a number of reasons, very practical reasons. Even if an Islamic takeover takes place, which is very unlikely, because this is not about Islam. This is not about Islam. For a number of reasons. One, Egypt has regained all of its previously occupied territories from Israel. So there is nothing we should fight for in terms of territory and so on. We have it all. We have also full control over the Suez Canal. And I think any war with Israel would immediately deprive this nascent or new government, democratic government and so on, of $15 billion a year, an annual revenue of the Suez Canal. Third, the decision to go to war or to keep the peace is not up entirely to the civilians. The military establishment has to play a role in this. And the Egyptian military institution has kept the peace for the last 30 years. And I think they are in favor of the peace. Fifth, any new democratic government in Egypt will need every penny to clean up the economic mess and the corruption that Mubarak has built for the past 30 years. So it will not venture to go into war. That's what I think in general. In addition, of course, I think the idea of venturing and going to war and so on with Israel, it would be very risky and extremely risky to any new government. However, this is not the end of the stories. There will be some difficulties, of course, in a new government of Egypt. In Egypt, as you know, Mubarak has been a great asset when it comes to the peace process in general, mediation between Hamas and others and so on, cutting out any kind of smuggling of weapons and so on. To a large extent, this will change. To a large extent, the same thing will apply to U.S. strategic interests in the region with the emergence of democratic governments and so on. I think it will be tougher, and it will be in a more difficult situation because it will be similar to Turkey, how the United States is dealing with Turkey to a large extent, that these will be accountable governments to their people, to a parliament. They cannot really give favors just left and right as Mubarak used to do and so on. And I think that, of course, maybe something good will come out of this, that at least the United States can be pushed to deal with other nations with respect and also on the basis of moral values and ethical values. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Emad. I will take 3 parts of the title of this panel and claim it. One is the question mark, the other is Lebanon, and the third is beyond. Beyond, if I have some time, I'll speak a little bit about Israel-Palestine. The question mark is not because I doubt the significance and the gravity of the events that have been unraveling in the Middle East in the past month or so, more so because I'm speaking about Lebanon here, hence the question mark. The title of the panel also speaks about the rise of civil resistance in the Middle East, and that also I find problematic when speaking about the political turmoil that has engulfed Lebanon in the last few months, if you want, since 2005, and if you want to stretch it even before, beyond, since the Israeli withdrawal from South Lebanon in 2000, and you can go even further beyond in time. And I doubt that. I mean, I refuse to use this term of civil resistance, the rise of civil resistance in Lebanon, because what has happened in Lebanon is more or less same old. Basically, the political class struggling within each other, against each other over dominance. And when I'm speaking about the political class, I include the old feudal patrons of Lebanese politics, and also Hezbollah that since the late 1990s has entered this game of Lebanese politics and has become yet another manifestation of Lebanese political class with not enough regard for what the civil society or the masses are interested in. And that has been the case, as I see it, in Lebanon the last few months. For those of you who are maybe a little bit uninformed about that, the government in Lebanon, the coalition government in Lebanon, disintegrated as a result of the withdrawal of Hezbollah and the pro-Hezbollah bloc from this government, because of the possibility that the special tribunal that investigates the assassination of Rafik al-Hariri might indict some members of Hezbollah. Hezbollah has tried to claim that this is a US-Israeli plot, the special tribunal, and that should Lebanon follow up, accept and cooperate with the STL, with the special tribunal, that they would simply pull out from the government, bring to its downfall. This is indeed what they have done, and now we are facing the possibility of another government in Lebanon that that would be supported by Hezbollah, and that would bring what used to be the pro-Western Hariri coalition to possibly to the opposition. The one common denominator that I find between the Lebanese case and the Egyptian-Tunisian case, and that I think has been marked in part by Emad, And that is that all in all, American strategy with regard to the Middle East is on the verge of disintegration. The STL has been, to a large extent, the brainchild of the Bush administration. They hoped that they would be able to indict the Syrian government. In the meantime, the STL has taken a life of its own, if you want, and now the possibility or the likelihood that it would actually point at members of Hezbollah in the assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri and other Lebanese politicians and journalists since 2005. I have 5 minutes? Oh. And so what we're seeing in Lebanon is basically, to a large extent, part of a greater picture of American grand strategy with regard to the Middle East, identifying who is moderate in American terms, Western terms, and who is radical against, again, in American and Western terms, supporting the moderates versus the radicals. And you have to qualify these terms, of course. You have to take into account that I'm criticizing these terms, moderates versus radicals, because they are completely taken from the American perspective of American interests and Western interests that divided the Middle East politics and Middle East countries into these two dichotomies that are basically unraveling now in front of us as we speak. If we want to speak about civil resistance in Lebanon, then Lebanon had its chance, and indeed there was. The pictures that we have just seen up there, you could actually see, I could have shown you very similar pictures from 2005 in Lebanon. Following the assassination of Rafiq al-Hariri, Lebanese, in their masses, millions, went out to the streets. It wasn't Tahrir Square, but it was the Central Square in Beirut, where very similar demonstrations took place, all mostly calling for Syrian withdrawal from Lebanon. And then Hezbollah, a few days later, organized its own, sorry, it was the other way around. First, Hezbollah organized its movement in support or thanking the Syrian presence in Lebanon, and then the opposition, over 1 million people, went to the streets and demonstrated, actually calling for Syria to go out, to leave. And so the moment was there, and it was gone basically, because Lebanon is back to, as I've already said, same old, same old. This does not mean that what we are witnessing now might end as it has ended in Lebanon, but it gives some, I think, some reason to be cautious about the outcomes of such a thing. And I'm not trying to compare here between what happened in Lebanon in 2005 and what has been happening in Egypt, because it is by far more important, the events in Egypt are by far more grave, important. What we are witnessing in Egypt is a tsunami, no less than that. And in Lebanon, it was not so. Also, the ability of the Lebanese to affect the Middle East are minuscule, as opposed to Egypt. Whatever would happen in Egypt would have dramatic effects on the greater Middle East. In Lebanon, things like this could be contained. And I would even say that if this civil unrest was contained only to Tunisia, it would have been able to be contained because of the size of Tunisia and because of the fact that Tunisia doesn't really play the same role as Egypt has been playing in Egyptian politics. The Lebanese case does provide us with interesting issues when we speak about the processes of democratization in the Middle East, because there has been free press in Lebanon since the establishment of the state of Lebanon in 1920, or definitely since the departure of the French in 43. There has been a vibrant civil society in Lebanon. All these items that we Westerners like to speak when we make these conditions about what is required for the establishment of democratic societies, this has been in existence in Lebanon, and there has been to some extent some form of democratic processes, elections, a la Lebanese style, if you want, that have some resemblance to democratic processes. But these elections have all in all been played out by the political elites and have had little effect on the local population, on the masses. Lebanese politics is basically a game of very few and a small number of people. And this has been the case since 1920 and has remained so. Almost a disconnect between what I've already said, civil society, a free press, a very vibrant society, and the political class that plays its game almost separately from the civil society in Lebanon. Another interesting thing when we speak about the case of Lebanon and democratization, that if we are genuinely concerned with the democratization in Lebanon, then we also have to take into account that democratization, full democratization in Lebanon also implies a greater share for the Shias in the country. The Shias, we estimate, are about 40% of the Lebanese society, and out of 128 seats in Lebanese parliament, the Shias are allocated only 28 seats. So when one thinks about democratization in Lebanon, one also has to take into account that fact. So if I were an outsider to this conflict, I would have said, I would have heard Hezbollah General Secretary of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, speaking about greater representation of Shias in Lebanon, and I would say, sure, he's right. I mean, democratic procedure means that Shias in Lebanon should get their fair share in the consociational system that governs Lebanon. Right now, they don't. And if you look at it from that perspective, then Hezbollah is basically asking what Shias deserve, greater representation of their power in the political system in the country. Second twist of democratization when we speak about the issues of democratization. I have time for the beyond? 2 minutes for the beyond. The Arab-Israeli conflict in 2 minutes. Emad has already spoken about the Egyptian-Israeli conflict. Clearly, what happens in Egypt, whatever happens in Egypt, will have a major effect on the Arab-Israeli conflict by and large, because Egypt and the government of Israel and the Mubarak regime have had a strategic alliance in the past 30 years, very similar to the alliance that Mubarak has had with the United States, and that could very well change. We don't know that. I mean, the process is still, everything is unfolding. Everything is on shaky ground. But I would like to raise something interesting here about civil unrest and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because I wonder what the Palestinians are actually thinking right now when they see this mass movement of unrest. It has been suggested several times that for the Palestinians actually to challenge the Israeli occupation, or to break the deadlock that the conflict has reached, is to create a mass movement of civil unrest, very similar to the pictures that we have seen here. I don't know if that would happen. I don't know if this is a possibility. The Israeli state, the Israeli military holds very, very strongly, an extremely strong grip over the Palestinian society in the West Bank, and it would be extremely challenging for the Palestinians actually to rise up and to perform this act of mass civil unrest. But it would be I think this is the place where some Palestinians could actually look and think about their own ability to engage in such a mass movement of civil unrest. I would like to conclude with another additional beyond that is more general. I teach a class here at Notre Dame on the modern Middle East. It's a general class of the last 150 years in the Middle East. And every end of semester, when I teach this class, I conclude the concluding session, and I am very pessimistic about where the Middle East is. Where the Middle East is located as we speak, as I speak, and I bring the certain aspects where I see problems. I speak about ideological confusion, I speak about political stagnation, I speak about socioeconomic paralysis of most Arab societies in the Middle East, and this concluding class is all in all fairly bleak, as I've already said. I think we are facing here now something that is, for the first time in years, and maybe in more than one generation or two, may actually change this sense of stagnation that is not only my own reflections as a teacher, but I think is shared by historians, political scientists, and other observers of the Middle East. We are witnessing here a historical moment of really cataclysmic powers, and we'll see where it takes us. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we truly are living in amazing historical times, especially for those of us who are teaching about the Middle East and, in my case, nonviolent social change. My son said the other day, well, how does it feel to just open up the pages of the papers and the TV every day and it's all about your topic? Makes it easier in the classroom. We can just say, what's going on today? And certainly it is perhaps the most dramatic expression of people power in history. Certainly it rivals that of the so-called Velvet Revolution in Eastern Central Europe in '89. And never before have the people in the region mobilized in such vast numbers to shake off the chains of autocracy. And this certainly puts the lie to the common understanding that many have. Students always say in the early classes, well, nonviolence is nice in theory. Gandhi and King, it was worked nicely in these so-called and more democratic societies and the British colonies and in the US, but it doesn't really work in authoritarian regimes and in police states and dictatorships. Well, we see now that it can work, and we've seen it all over the world, that nonviolent resistance is truly a force more powerful. The uprisings going on now in the Middle East are impressive, not only for their scale, but also for the character of these actions and some of the lessons they teach us about the nature of nonviolent resistance. So I'll try to go through a few of those. Some of these characteristics confirm what we know about nonviolent resistance, but others kind of stretch our understanding and ask us to rethink some of the categories of analysis that we've had today. Most remarkable is the way in which this protest movement has been restrained and disciplined and largely nonviolent, as Emad has said. People have taken to the streets against police and military violence, the attacks by Mubarak's goons and thugs, and many have died. We saw from Human Rights Watch the other day, the estimate is at least 300 have died in Egypt. More than 100 were reportedly killed in Tunisia. So this is, it takes extraordinary courage to go out into the streets not expecting or seeing the possibility that you could be killed. And the kind of commitment that the Google executive displayed in his television broadcast the other day, this commitment that we're going to stay here, we're willing to give our lives if necessary for this struggle. And it embodies this sentiment that this is a struggle I'm prepared to die for, but never to kill for. Extraordinary degree of courage and commitment required for that. And in that sense, it does fit with the classic Gandhian model. And the protesters, resistors, seem to know instinctively the necessity of nonviolent discipline. It's not because they've read my book, Gandhi and Beyond, or have taken lessons from Gene Sharp and those who teach these principles, but they know fully well that the nonviolent method is the right thing to do. It's morally correct, but it's also the practical thing. It works best. And we know this also from a lot of social science research that's now accumulating, especially the Stefan and Chenoweth article in International Security in 2008, which showed that major social resistance movements that use nonviolent resistance methods are twice as likely to be effective as those that use armed struggle. And Freedom House did a similar study which showed that the use of nonviolent methods is much more likely to create a society that's more open and more democratic. So these are lessons that are instinctively known and are spreading around the world, and it's a recognition that this is necessary to win politically. It's necessary to win over third parties. It's also critically necessary to try to win the loyalties or begin to create loyalty shifts within the government and especially within the military. In some of the previous examples of nonviolent resistance, the so-called colored revolutions in the former Soviet states, we saw a conscious effort by the resistors to engage in dialogue with the military. This was most dramatically evident in Ukraine in the so-called Orange Revolution in 2004, when the resistance leaders were actively negotiating with the military and kept the military in the barracks, kept them neutral so that the resistance movement could mobilize public support. So this is a critically important factor. In Egypt, this lesson is being applied. We saw the lessons of the way in which the resistors are trying to win over the military. There was an appeal for the resistance to hug a soldier. So some of the protesters climbed up on top of the tanks. They put flowers on them. All of this is a very positive approach, and it sends a message. It says that the struggle is against the dictatorship, not against the rank-and-file military. It's critically necessary to win over the military. And already the protesters in Egypt have won tremendous gains in terms of Mubarak's pledge to leave in September, supposedly, the sacking of some government ministers, the wage increases. But a critical question becomes, how does the movement sustain pressure in order to fulfill those pledges, to ensure that those pledges are fulfilled, and to really gain the democracy that is their ultimate objective. So this is a struggle that, contrary to what some of the press were implying, it was going to be very quick. This is likely to be a protracted struggle, and as Emad said, persistence is going to be absolutely necessary. And this is another way in which this struggle does fit with the classic model of the Gandhian method, the nonviolent resistance. A protracted, persistent struggle is absolutely essential. In Egypt, it's clear that the role of the military will be key. As Emad said, right now they're playing an ambiguous role. But the protesters, I think, have already gained a significant advance when the armed forces declared that they would not shoot against the people. And there is a posture of neutrality to some extent among members of the military. This is something that really needs to be worked on to follow the model of what was done in Ukraine and elsewhere. And it's especially important then that the resistors avoid provocations, try to control their ranks, to try to isolate those who are provocateurs. Of course, there are some small elements of Al-Qaeda type forces that are trying to take advantage of the situation. The movement has been, I think, quite remarkable in trying to maintain control over these type of settings. Very wisely, I would say, as well. Now, one way in which this struggle definitely differs from earlier models is the horizontal nature of the structure. Well, it's hard to even say there is a structure. It's an effort that has spread through social media, through horizontal communications. The classical model says we have to build organization, you have to have structures, you need very substantial organizational capabilities. Here it seems to have sprung up genuinely in a spontaneous manner. But then what does that say about the ability to sustain the struggle? So far it's been quite amazing, and here's where we, I think, are rewriting some of the theory and the analysis of social resistance as the days go on. The regime has been very wise generally in how it's responded. They've not unleashed mass military force or attacked. The thugs and the goon squad attacks backfired, as we saw. And so the regime seems to have learned that co-option generally, trying to stretch this out, try to buy time is their primary strategy. And this puts a challenge to the resistance movement to be able to sustain their activities. It's going to be very difficult to keep hundreds of thousands of people in the central square for the weeks and months that may be necessary. So it'll be a requirement to look for more innovative tactics and to continue to build broad support. That seems to be happening to some extent with the trade unions becoming involved now, with the movement spreading to many different sectors. So this will be something really important for us to watch, how the tactics and the methods begin to evolve here in the coming months. So there are a lot of other lessons we could go through. I'll just close to say that we're learning as we watch, but certainly we can see that this is once again a confirmation that the means of nonviolent resistance are an effective tool for social change, and they're creating an entirely new politics in Egypt and throughout the region. Thank you.
Okay, we'll begin by letting the panelists react or ask questions to one another before opening the discussion to the audience.
Can you start asking if you want? Okay. No, please start. Well, I have a question, and it's really a concern that has been voiced through the Facebook and so on from some of these youth to David, because of course you are the expert on this. And the question is, for the past 2 days, 2 days ago, there has been a concern among the youth that the mood domestically and internationally has been shifting toward accepting, change within the regime and so on, to the extent that even some people started to ask them just to demobilize and go home. But of course, they responded, as you have seen today, with massive demonstrations that took. So, what would be your advice to them? Yes, to keep it going. You understand the situation like this. They are getting so many conflicting advice from people. People are jumping wagons now. Opportunists are emerging to go and negotiate with the regime and so on.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a very tough question. We talked about it in class today. Maybe the students can offer their opinion. But all the lessons of the past suggest that it's going to be progressively more difficult to sustain this level of mass mobilization. The other issue is that the objectives of the resistance are really very grandiose. It's not just bring down Mubarak, it's completely change the constitutional system. The likelihood that they can win all of those objectives is, it's not that great. So will they come to a moment where they need to decide, we've won what we can to date, and now we need to negotiate and consolidate and then move on to the next? This is a struggle that, as we know from history, Gandhi faced. In the Great Salt Campaign, they mobilized for months and months. They seemed to be on the brink of great success. They called it off, went to the negotiating table, and came back with basically nothing. Now they won eventually, and they had changed the basic social dynamic of the society. No longer could anyone say that people of India were willing to accept colonial rule, but it took many more years. So we can't say from the outside, but these tough strategic dilemmas are now critical for them. And this is a question, too, of the structure, or lack thereof. How do you make decisions when it is so horizontal? So far, they've seemed to have a kind of collective consciousness that's remarkably wise. But how that will unfold, it's a big question.
Other questions?
I have some thoughts, comments maybe, and maybe if you one or two questions. The first is the use of the word revolution. There is no question that, this is, as we have already agreed, this is a massive, massive event. The question whether it is a revolution, of course, is, in my view, a different matter. Revolution, I think, could only be, could be analyzed and judged if you take the long term, the longue durée, if you want. The long-term effects. For years, the 1952 coup was considered, here is the Egyptian revolution, and slowly but surely what you got is Mubarak and almost a return to the pre-52 situation. You mentioned the 200 individuals, and that the 200 individuals that are in control of Egyptian, of 90-something% of Egyptian economy. It reminded me of the landed aristocracy before 1952. There was not much difference. And here came Nasser, and did engage in, I think he had the very good intentions of actually revolutionizing the Egyptian society, the agrarian reforms and so on. And the end result, as I've already suggested, was Mubarak. I mean, we basically reached a full circle from, so and of course, if you look at other greater revolutions that we are familiar with, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Chinese Revolution, in events of this massive scale, and I'm hesitant in using this term, although it is very, it's very catchy. Of course, we are witnessing a revolution because it's attractive to use this term. I'm cautious about that because I would like to see it evolving. I was intrigued by the whole idea of nonviolence and what was explained by David, the fact that it is basically unstructured, and that there is no charismatic leader. There is no Gandhi, there is no Martin Luther King, there is no one person that leads it all, and for me that is actually very fascinating. And I keep thinking about Egypt as a society, and maybe Emad would be able to enlighten us here, or not, or maybe it's on my own premature thoughts about the Egyptian society, because my sense of the Egyptian society that in essence there is a non-violent structure to this society that is essential as part and parcel of if you want, the public realm, an atmosphere. When you get to Egypt, it may be chaotic, but it is not, there is no violent dimension that is out there in your face. And I wonder if there is something here that actually explains this mass non-violent movement that has no organization. 99.9% of them have never read Gandhi or Gandhi and Beyond, and still, and I could think about other. I could think on other Middle Eastern societies that, if you look at their political history, you see much more violence. And Egyptian society, even when during moments of major political turmoil, such as the '52 revolution, there was no real violence that was exerted by the population, even by the leadership itself. And maybe the Mubarak regime is one of the exceptions to this rule. I'm not suggesting that Nasser was, a non-violent person advocating non-violence, but something here that maybe you could.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I'll just comment very quickly, but before I do that, I just would like to acknowledge and thank Andre for just helping me put this slideshow together. I mean, he worked really for hours and with me on this. So I'm sorry, I just rushed into the talk before thanking him. 2 points about this. One, really, maybe it could be a fundamental point about maybe the events that are folding now in Tunisia and Egypt and perhaps maybe in Yemen or Syria later on, whatever, or the West Bank, might help us to reconsider our definition of revolution. Usually revolutions, as we teach them and so on, they tend to be bloody, violent, as you mentioned, and highly structured. Intelligentsia behind them, there is a program of action, there is some kind of a vanguard party and so on. This does not exist in this revolution. And I think the reason is very simple. This is globalization. I think this revolution, for me at least, even though I'm very critical of globalization and so on, but this is a reflection of a globalized age. Everything is, like, as David said, horizontal. Borders are breaking down, and also even these kind of structured elements and units and secret organizations behind a revolution and so on did not exist in this case. The only thing, just to respond to the issue of violence, the Middle East has seen before a non-violent revolution, the Iranian Revolution. The Iranian Revolution, in its beginning as a revolution in the making, was really a very non-violent revolution. And I think also that this was very impressive, of course, throwing flowers at the Shah's army and chocolates and so on in order to demoralize them. That was a lesson learned from the Iranian Revolution. The nonviolence, I've heard some of these youth talking about their intention, especially after the 300 dead that David talked about. I don't know whether you have seen the interview with Wa'il Ghunaim or not, the Google guy, and how he apologized for the mothers and parents of all those who have fallen and so on. And he said that was not our intention. Our intention was not to harm anybody, even Mubarak's police. We didn't want to harm this. So there was this kind of culture inside them. This is a different generation, by the way, and it's a shocking generation for us, even for me. Even, I don't want to talk about myself and my students and so on, but some of them are my former students at AUC and so on. And they come on TV and stuff like that. They are even different generation than the one I saw, Wa'il Ghunaim and the Google guys and so on. They are different. These people, they share a lot of common these ideas of really humanistic face and aspect of change and so on. I think they hold it dearly. The second thing about revolution, this is my biggest concern. This is a state, as you know, Egypt. It has a state that I can claim that's 3,000 years old. It's really pharaonic. The state has its own mind, the state, and which Mubarak is trying now to disintegrate actually by all this, acts of thugs and so on. But this is a state that has, and this is what really concerns me about a revolution. Whether this generation, this new generation, will be really able to overhaul the entire system. Because that's what qualifies it as a revolution, despite the fact that it's not violent, and despite the fact that it doesn't have this kind of vertical organization. But I think it seeks an overhauling of the entire system. The issues of freedom, the issues of pluralism, the issues of social justice, the issue of multi-party system, democracy, and so on. Hopefully they are seeking to build a new system. I hope they will be permitted to do so because it's their future, not mine, not my generation, even my generation. It's not my generation, it's their future. I know many people, when I raised this opinion or view, they said, look, you make the revolution, but it has to be the politicians and political parties. My statement here is the Egyptian political parties should step out and step back because they have, with Mubarak, impoverished the political system in Egypt, as you know. They are very highly factionalized, they are weak, easily co-optable, and they are not up to the moment. They are not. And they haven't been as such.
Speaking about leadership, we had an email from a member of our audience who is in Cairo, who is an MA student here at the Kroc Institute, and who took a fortunate or unfortunate leave of absence because he was called to take a job at the foreign ministry in January. His name is Mina Rizk. Yeah, and he emailed a question for all three panelists. He's asking, one of the fundamental dilemmas that face the Egyptian political life is the old age, just to refer to your point, of most political leaders and key officials in the Egyptian regime. And we all believe that the youth, who form 60% of the current Egyptian population, were the real engines of the revolt of January 25th. However, it is seen that all the negotiations for political settlements and constitutional amendments are led by some opposition leaders who are actually of the same old age. For example, Muhammad al-Baradei, 69 years old. Ammar Musa, Arab League Secretary General and former foreign minister, 75 years old. Ahmed Shafiq, new prime minister, 69 years old. Ahmed Kamal Abu Maged, prominent constitution expert, 80 years old, and so forth. So although we do not question the political experience of any of those leaders, we still miss the role of the younger generations who collaboratively led the revolt. Now, how can we prepare the youth to take the lead of the political life in Egypt? And who can represent them in negotiations at the negotiations? And that refers to both the issue of verticality versus horizontality and the issue of the demographics as well as the Facebook phenomena. So if you want to start, please.
Okay, sure. I think, look, these are very politically aware youth, by the way. Unlike, the impression that these are kids, these are the Facebook kids. I mean, the geeks of the Facebook and, with their, jeans, down halfway and stuff like that. Yes, no, they are not. They are not. They have shown a remarkable capacity to learn on the spot and actually to decide the direction of this movement. I remember 3 or 4 days ago, everybody was holding the Egyptian constitution. When this idea about Article 82 and 84 and so on and so forth about the vice presidency and stuff like that, they were all learning about the constitution and so on. And I think they took recently, like as of 3, I fully agree with Mina. The old generation, including my generation and so on, should step out, completely out. This was a generation of failure. This is a co-optable and co-opted generation. We had a large part in this failure and in this building this autocracy, and we have to admit to this and let them chart their own course. This is a future, believe me. We don't understand their language. This is beyond us. The Facebook and Twitter. I don't know. I have a Facebook, of course, but not Twitter. But not Twitter. All right. No, this is not a joke. This is not a joke.
How many friends do you have?
So I'm just trying to say that these kids are beyond, and they have to chart, and we have to trust them. And I think they took the right step. What they did, they formed 2 committees. One committee that everybody is trying to overpass from themselves of 10. These are the ones that are representative of this movement, of these demonstrations, and another committee of 20 of experts, legal experts, jurists, intellectuals, and so on that they can consult with. The problem is the people around them from day one started just to change and start to just really rush in order to pick the fruits of this and so on. And they have, of course, come out on television several times, on Facebook several times, and they are complaining about this, that they will be in the end viewed as the core, the hardcore, the hardliners in the square, and will leave them until they rot in the square. Everybody else went to the palace to negotiate with the president and the vice president and so on. So I would say to Mina, please hang on. It's a matter of hours. It's a matter of days. Hang on, persevere, because this is your future, not ours. It's your future, and you are the ones who should decide this and chart this course.
Yeah, and Mina is tuned to our broadcast. Yeah, Scott.
Great question.
Yeah.
My question is for Professor Shahin, kind of following on that, and Emad, you may have already kind of answered it in what you just said, but you said in your presentation that this uprising or revolution or whatever we're going to end up calling it is not about the Muslim Brotherhood. Agreed. But if I have been a member of the Muslim Brotherhood for the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, couldn't I credibly say at this point, listen, we've been the face of the opposition. We have institutional structures of the sort. We've tried to play the political game. We've done this and that. Not so much it's our time, but wouldn't many Egyptians say, yes, there's even a younger generation of Muslim brothers, and they really have earned the right to at least have a major voice in the conversation because they have been obdurate, steadfast. They've been critiquing the regime on these questions, while the rest of us have stayed relatively passive. Is that fair analysis? And I mean, my comment is not to put support behind Muslim Brotherhood as such. It just seems that there would be an appeal there, even on a kind of social justice criteria.
Yes, definitely. Look, just to put it into perspective and in a very objective way, the Muslim Brotherhood, as we all know, it has been the most organized and most popular Islamic opposition movement in Egypt and maybe in some other Arab countries. They have political ambitions as well as social, of course, and religious ambitions. They have never denied these ambitions. And they have been equally ambiguous about their intentions in some cases. However, they also realized over the years meaning starting especially from 2002 and maybe 1995, but we'll just stick to 2002, that the Egyptian society is much more diverse than what they would hope for, and they are not the only key players, and they need to shield themselves also behind a kind of a pluralistic political spectrum. They have suffered a lot, and maybe that can, as you said, can give them some kind of legitimate claims to have a bigger share and so on, like the Nahda movement in Tunisia. They have taken most of the brunt of this repressive regimes and so on and so forth. The issue is that, and this is what I always try to focus on, let's not make it, and that's what I say, I don't know whether they will hear this or not, an issue of movements or personalities or ideologies. This is an institutional, structural enterprise, future enterprise. And the best path toward this is to make sure that we chart a new course where we can build effective institutional safeguards that will promote a conducive democratic life in Egypt, regardless of any movement, regardless of any army general, regardless of Gamal Mubarak that was, on the list, and regardless of any type of regime. That this is a democratic, that we build the foundations of a democratic. Now, many people will tell you, where is the safeguard for this? You have heard before, America likes the generals. Even some, like Hakel, some very top analysts in Egypt like the generals and the military. I would say it's the judicial system. It's the judges. Egypt has there are 2 or 3 institutions in Egypt that still carry the ethos and spirits of a liberal democracy of 1920s. One of them is the judicial system. The judicial system is liberal in essence in Egypt. Even under socialist regimes, Nasser and so on, they always judged in favor of private ownership, even under socialism, of liberal policies and for open economic systems and so on. That's how they have always been. And of course, these liberal traditions are very deep-rooted in the judicial system. And I would say we should not bet again on the military. As Asher said, this was, where are we now? Into a hereditary Republican system like the king, exactly, in 1952. That's what Mubarak wants Egypt to go. So I agree with your concerns 100%. And therefore, just to sum up, let's do it as an institutional process, not as an individual or movement-based process.
Thank you. We'll take 3 questions at a time so that we'll be able to be efficient. In the back next to Professor Appleby. Excuse me, 1 second, wait for the microphone. You need to wait for the microphone.
This was a fascinating presentation by everybody. I had a question similar to the one from here.
It's not on.
And that is, what one can think of from what you said, 3 stages of this. One is this reaction, a protest against some horrible injustices.
Yes.
And a sub-part of that, of course, is the non-violent nature of that. A second part is what I think Professor Cortright mentioned, how long this can be sustained. And a third is what you were just mentioning, which is building what happens afterwards.
Yes.
And my question is, it's all right for us old fogies to be really fascinated by social media, but I think social media, as some people have pointed out, might lead to some kind of low-level things, despite the courage shown, but it can achieve protest more easily, perhaps less easily make it non-violent, much more difficult to sustain, and even more difficult to have real change afterwards. So I'm wondering whether the success in terms of social media is going to cause problems, or what can the leadership, rather than horizontal thing, do to safeguard that there is more deeper organizational issues.
Yes.
Okay. I'll take 2 more questions before Christy Green over there just went.
Mine's actually related to
Can you wait for the microphone, please?
My question's another take on social media, particularly related to gender. And the first weekend that the uprising in Egypt was happening, I was watching on the news, and I felt that I was seeing an awful lot of male faces. And I got online and saw a lot of discussion in feminist listservs about that. But then the pictures that Professor Shahin showed started coming out of women in the uprising. However, there was this one tantalizing article early last week, I think it was in the New York Times, that said that there were women in Egypt who were essentially directing sort of the troops by social media. Maybe the idea was that they were afraid of becoming the next Neda in Iran, but this was a way for them to sort of safely participate and maybe even direct it. So I started thinking, gee, should we start distributing smartphones to women in other parts of the world? But I'm just wondering if you know anything about that.
Since those two questions are related, let's try to respond to them. Professor Cortright, do you want to start?
Yeah, we're in new territory here, so we really can't say. But I think there's no reason necessarily why a revolution with a small r that is inspired and organized largely through social media would have a character that would make it impossible to decide on these new structures and new possibilities for a more democratic future. In fact, I think because the very nature of the media are so democratic, they are available to everyone, it is horizontal, it suggests that the possibility of a more open political process and a more democratic kind of system is greater, and it's built into the very process itself of the change process. So I think the prospects for coming to this better future are not in any way diminished by this kind of horizontal process, but maybe even enhanced. And yeah, it probably is a good idea to distribute smartphones and to everyone, and it's increasing around the world. So.
Okay, I'll take more questions. Yes, please. You're in with the blue shirt. Yeah.
Probably a question for David. I spoke on the phone this afternoon with my Egyptian relatives in Cairo, and most of the report matched what we've heard here, but he went on and had a question about the U.S. role that I'd like to get a comment. He said, the U.S. Department of State seems to feel that they have to say something every day. This is not helpful. He said, in the beginning, they said, we are monitoring the situation, and that was okay. But now, every day, do this and do this, or Mubarak has to do that. This we consider interfering, and it's not helpful.
Okay, thank you. I'll take two more questions. Patrick?
I had a question along the lines of religion, and you know, one of the main themes we've seen, and you mentioned it, was this fear of Islamization and Muslim Brotherhood and so forth that we see in the media. But I want to hypothesize and tell me if I'm right. That actually maybe this might be a moment where we see a reversal in what we've seen in recent years of the upsurge of religious identity and religious affiliation in the Middle East. The idea that Islam was the solution, everything else failed, and so Islam is the solution. And we've seen actually the religious authorities largely on the wrong side of this. That the imams on the first Friday told the people not to go out and demonstrate during their sermon. And of course, the imams are state employees. The Coptic patriarch came out with a statement this week, essentially calling on the protest to end and emphasizing security as the foremost thing. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood today has said they wouldn't field a candidate for president. So are we seeing actually the rise, and all the rhetoric is about Egypt, and it's really wonderful to see. So are we seeing the rise of something like a civic nationalism rather than a racial nationalism, like Arab nationalism that we saw earlier, or an ethnic or religious-based nationalism that people had talked about?
In the political demand, what do you see as the influence of aftermath?
1 month?
As an aftermath of this.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to, Professor Shahin, would you like to begin?
Sure. I would like to link 2 or 3 questions,
Yes.
please. One about the organizational needs in the future, and also with Patrick's. I think the link to this is that over the past 8 years at least, there has been a clear agenda of reforms emerging gradually in Egypt. And that's why if you look at this youth websites as a movement, the April 6 movement and so on, they say we don't have any demands, that aside from the demands that had been put forward by the Egyptian political forces and so on. And these mainly freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, separation of powers, new constitution, clean and fair elections, and of course end of this hereditary rule and so on and so forth. This is exactly what links both It's not about Islam. It's about actually the way forward, how Egyptians can organize their social and political society. Identity is there, and identity is responding in Egypt or unfolding in response to bigger issues. The issue of globalization, the issue of US presence in the region, the issue of hegemony. This will take, its own course, a different course. They might overlap. But what we are facing now is how can the Egyptian and Tunisian and Algerian political communities, civil societies, organize their future after reaching an impasse, really an impasse, because this is the future that we had. Look at the future of Libya, from Qaddafi to his son, Saif al-Islam. The future of Egypt, from Mubarak to his son, and if the son is not there, to his dog, and so on. Like his pet. That's what I always say in my classes. This is exactly our future. They will just give it to the pets later on. It doesn't matter. Or look at Yemen. Look at Yemen. Again, the guy was grooming his son to become a president. This is the future. This is the future. All right. So this is exactly where all this noise is about. How the social and political civil society, if one may say, can organize, can chart its course for the future. Now, the identity is, of course, totally different. Or Islam is the solution? Of course, it's not the solution. I mean, when it comes to building structures and so on, maybe it's an inspiration, maybe it's a way of resistance, maybe it's a shield at some point. But of course, people need to organize their political structures, build parliaments, political parties, and constitution, and so on. So I don't know whether this addresses your question or not. But the youth also have, this is something also that's missing from all this. We are in a standoff, not in Tunisia, in Egypt. One of the reasons of the standoff is what? The youth. They are refusing to go to the negotiating table, despite all the appeals. The youth in Tahrir Square. I'm not talking about the kids that they co-opted and just took photos with them and so on. No, the real revolutionaries in Tahrir Square. Small r. No, because this is a good point. Yes, it's a very fundamental point. These kids are refusing to negotiate until now. And they're actually enlarging their support more and more. Oh, the women issue. Can I just mention something very quickly about the women issue? Yes, you are absolutely right. Actually, there is a whole website, Women for the January 25th Revolution. And these they keep going. And I got many of the pictures from them and so on, photos from them. And this is something, I don't know whether it's known in the West or not, but or it's always, or it's maybe deliberately overlooked and so on. Women has always played a very crucial role in upheavals, uprising, and so on. I can mention the crackdown on Hama in 1981. Actually, it's women who sustained the movement after the crackdown of the Islamists in Syria for years to regroup and so on. The same thing happened in Egypt after 1954 and especially in 1965. It was women. I'm not going to mention names just not to, but they are known that these were the like the women who saved the Muslim Brotherhood. Two women. They regrouped. They collected funds, money, sustained the families, and so on. If you look at the Palestinians, it's the women that are really behind all this to a large extent. In some respects, I mean, like as mothers, and they're raising their children to resist and so on and so forth. And you have seen also the pictures. I mean, they play a major role in this.
Is there, Professor Kaufman didn't want to respond.
Sure. We are basically now in the middle of the process. It's in motion. We are in a stage, and when this stage is over, and I would like to hope that the Mubarak regime would be peacefully removed, and something else would rise in Egypt. There is no question that there would be a power struggle between the different parties that participated in this revolution in small r. And that I would like to hope that this power struggle will take place within very clear rules of engagement, democratic procedure, hopefully. But there is no vacuum, in political power. One power will be removed, and immediately there will be a struggle over dominance over the power that was vacated. And I have no question that there would be Islamic movements that would play a role in this struggle over power, over dominance, over control over the Egyptian polity. Would they take over, as many people in the United States, in Israel, are concerned, afraid of? Would they recreate the Islamic Revolution in Iran? I don't, I mean, it's, I want to hope that they won't. I cannot guarantee for sure that it would not happen, but as signs are showing right now, this is not what they are officially declaring, and it is also they don't have the power base that the supporters of Khomeini had back in 78, 79 in Iran. Is this a form of civic nationalism versus Islamic nationalism? Maybe you could call it civic nationalism. These are different political parties that will vie for power in Egyptian political realm once this regime is out. About the American response, I think it's very interesting. There is a certain, I think, ritual within the United States. I think you're all familiar with. Something happens everywhere, somewhere in the world, and then the spokesperson of the state, of the White House, the State Department, he comes up, he speaks. There is this very famous, room where it takes place. I don't know if there is any other political power, a superpower out in the world that actually does the same. Like if something happens and then the Russian spokesperson comes up and speaks and says that. But this is clearly an American part of, I mean, this is American foreign policy and the American projection of actually we are engaged and we have an opinion and we would like to manage things. And in that context of the ritual, they have to say something. If they say, if there is now I'm serious. If they, the ritual is very important because it's part of the mindset of the White House and part of the mindset of, I think, of the State Department. It has to be done. It is understood as part of their job to be doing that. And they cannot, clearly they cannot back Mubarak anymore. But they are also concerned about their previous support to Mubarak, and they have to juggle between these two polarized issues. And right now, I think they are sort of in a lose-lose situation because it doesn't almost matter what they would say, but they would be blamed by one party or would be targeted by another party. And I think the United States has basically put itself in this corner that it's very difficult to get out of. The ritual is clearly, the visual manifestation of that, but it does tell us something about American foreign policy and the mindset. There are other issues here, but I think we exceeded our time, or...
Well, just one additional comment. I would call it the American delusion. This imperial mindset that we control the whole world and therefore have an obligation to comment on everything. Usually I believe that it's best for the United States to say nothing and do as little as possible, do no harm. But I do think in this instance, there should be a message, a clear, unequivocal, consistent message to Mubarak: go, get out as soon as possible. And that really has not been delivered. I think Patrick made some very interesting points about the civic nature of this uprising, that Islam is not the issue. And this is a tremendously hopeful development, and one that a wise American leadership, I would think, might want to encourage. And because it has significant implications, I think, for international security. It does require the U.S. to recognize that our foreign policy in the Middle East, our militarized warlike policies, are in disarray and rapidly collapsing, and a new approach will be necessary. But the Egyptian resistance movement is pointing the way. It's pointing the way toward a more constructive future for their own country, and potentially it's an infection that's spreading through the whole region. And it does provide an alternative to Islamism and to extremism, and I think to violent extremism. And it suggests that this whole war on terror mentality that the United States has been pursuing over these last years is completely out of date. It was never in date to begin with, frankly, but now it's proven to be completely irrelevant and counterproductive. The more we hold on to that, the more we retard this very hopeful element that's emerging in the region. And fundamentally, we have to see that a democratic, open society that we hope is evolving in Egypt is the best possible antidote to violent extremism. We have a very powerful object lesson. Ayman Zawahiri, the leader of Al-Qaeda, learned his trade, so to speak, became consumed with hatred and bitterness in Mubarak's jails as he was tortured. And we saw what came of that. A future in which that is a thing of the past offers hope for a better world for the entire region and a solution to these problems of violent extremism.
Thank you. We'll take two final brief questions from the audience. Rashid.
Thank you very much. Asha, I just want to put a nuance to you. You said that tsunami in Cairo, they call it a Tunisami. But another perspective back in South Africa, because Tunisia and Egypt is also part of Africa. In the soccer they play in the African Cup of Nations, and they're very, very good. So what about the impact of this Tunisami, not merely on the Middle East, but also on African countries? We have already heard of Mauritania, some protests there. We have dictatorships in Ethiopia, in Uganda, in Zimbabwe, and there are already signs of that. But I want to link it also, another perspective on it. To what extent, especially what David was saying now, to what extent is this Tunisami going to affect us in the United States? I mean, this is an introspective moment. $1.3 billion for over so long, propping up a dictator who killed and tortured and murdered so many people. Is there any kind of introspection? Is there any kind of, not only what David was saying, a civil society movement that can hold accountable, those in power, that can revolutionize American foreign policy? And I'm seeing signs of that. Wonderful article by Graham Fuller, member of the CIA. He's actually making that statement. And I think, we saw in the United States a wonderful social movement that was spawned, bringing, Obama to power. The problem was that the social movement then retired in the same way that we are asking Egyptians, to have fortitude to continue, to maybe retire in another way, but come back and fight another day. To what extent is these developments making us also to reflect upon a kind of social movement going onto the streets in the United States all over and asking for the US to change its foreign policy? Because more than any Muslim Brotherhood or Islamists, this is producing extremism in Saudi Arabia. The worst kind of the 19 September 11th hijackers, 11 came from one country. It's the worst dictatorship that you can ever have. Women can't even drive cars. And yet that's the biggest ally of the United States. And all of these dictators, maybe Mubarak also is giving an offer to go and into exile in Jeddah. When can we break this kind of silence? And it's not anti-Americanism. It's not saying that something wrong with, I see America has wonderful people who have wonderful values, but there's a disconnect between the values of the United States and the American foreign policy that's out.
Thank you, and we'll go to the other side of the room, over there. Good.
Thank you. I had a comment along the same lines, and that was on the role of the United States. It's okay to say, well, what America does, it has to do as a ritual, sort of go to the State Department and make light of it. But what I'm really concerned about is not what they're saying, but what they're doing behind the scenes. And I was wondering if you could comment on that, especially when you mentioned that the peace treaty with Israel is going to remain stable regardless of what happens. But I mean, not going to war is one thing, but changing the status quo on the ground, which was previously just giving money to Mubarak to provide cover for Israeli occupation and expansion. How will that change?
Thank you. Emad.
Okay. Will we have another round or just
No,
concluding?
that's the
Exactly.
final.
So let me just say, concluding remarks, just to address some of the questions. In terms of impact, hopefully, and I think one can safely label this as the fourth wave of democracy. that, the third wave, as you know, have missed the Arab world and so on. So hopefully this is the fourth wave of democracy that can act as a tsunami, Arab democratic tsunami and so on, and maybe affect other African countries. This is a way of popular upheaval and so on. The second point I would like to make, again, back to the issue of the potential of this youth and the future. I always say that these kids did in 8 days, what the Muslim Brotherhood failed to achieve in 80 years. And this is, and I mean what I'm saying. And that will address many of your concerns. In the way that they managed to galvanize, to present a consensual agenda of reform that can really build some kind of a mainstream, back to Patrick's point, national consensus. Not Islamic, not religious. You have seen the Copts, you have seen the Muslims. That's exactly what these kids did in eight days. The other thing about the U.S. and strategy and so on, I think if these people would like, these people meaning the EU and the United States, because they are the same for me, if they would like to think wisely, and in long term, they should act now and start building a coherent and consistent strategy of how to deal with future Arab democratic systems. Otherwise, you will get a third wave of protest, which is something similar to the Iranian Revolution. That's exactly what happened in Iran. The first very tamed revolt of 1905, 1911 was aborted. They got 50 years later, the Musaddaq, it was aborted, nationalist, populist. It was aborted by the CIA and so on, back, about what was going on behind the scene. So they got the third wave, which was the Islamic Revolution, much more radical one. We are in the second one now. What's going on in the Arab world is something, as David said, that can produce pluralistic, peaceful, and democratic systems. I hope they don't, again, act and this arrogance behind the scene and so on. They can manage Tony Blair again, coming to tell us we have to manage this process. I hope they don't manage it, because if they do, they will get an Islamic republic in 20 or 30 years, once again. I will conclude with that.
Yeah, thank you. David?
Well, I wish the US and the EU were the same in some respects. But no, I think the points are well made, and I especially appreciate Rashid's point that we in the US have to reflect upon what this means for us. And the risks of mistaken policies here are enormous, but the potential for a more pluralistic and democratic Middle East and more open societies in terms of the possibilities for a more peaceful region are so tremendous that I would hope our government could take more leadership, and really that's partly, I guess, up to us as American citizens to encourage that one consistent message that I mentioned, to get Mubarak out and support a democratic transition.
Thank you.
Yes, I can only support Rashid's comments about what should happen in the United States. In that sense, I think if you look at Barack Obama's policies towards the Middle East, you would see that there is not much change between before and after. Basically, the same ideas have been perpetuating under his administration, and that has been an extreme disappointment for his supporters and for this social movement that brought him to presidency, and that hope that he would bring the change as he promised to deliver. It is possible that such a social movement, social unrest, civil unrest, would be difficult to be produced in the United States, maybe because most Americans are too satisfied, satisfied. It's not happy, because Americans are not known for their happiness.
The pursuit of happiness.
No.
But satisfied in terms of it's the classical, the ultimate consumer society, and Americans are satisfied in that sense with their lives, driving with their SUVs to the supermarket, and the consecutive American administrations have actually thought that the way to sustain this SUV culture is through these alliances with oil-producing countries in the Middle East to support them so that the free flow of oil is guaranteed. I'm not suggesting that oil is the prime concern of American foreign policy, But I think it's one dimension of it. How to reverse that, I think now the United States will have to actually to figure out. Because it would be, I think it is linked. I mean, whatever happens in the Middle East and the changes that are coming now in the Middle East, and I am almost certain that they would come to a large degree, would have an effect on the United States alliances, on the United States, even domestically, I think, on the ability of the American economy even to sustain itself, to sustain this consumer society that has been established here. Some words about the Egyptian-Israeli peace agreement. I agree with Emad that the agreement is solid because it would be in the interests of every government that would take control of Egypt to sustain that agreement. It will definitely be in Israel's interest to keep the agreement going, but there is no doubt that something will change. The agreement will be there, but the strategic alliance that existed between Mubarak and the Israeli government, I suspect would cease to exist because I cannot envision a new regime in Egypt, a new government in Egypt that would be supportive of Israel as it stands now, and that would change. That could change through a different relationship between Egypt and Hamas in Gaza. That could change through Egypt would cease to be the link between Israel and the Arab world. There is a potential for that. And that could actually deteriorate matters, I think, with regards to the Arab-Israeli conflict. Because somehow Mubarak managed to keep the status quo going. And you can argue that the status quo is extremely negative because the status quo has not led us to anything. But the status quo, I suspect, would change, and that might lead to growing violence. And violence, I have always thought that it's difficult for me even to utter this publicly, but it may take more violence before the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is reaching a point of fruition to be, I don't know if resolved, but somehow be managed better.
Well, with these encouraging words, we'll conclude our session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.